Good morning, everyone. I will be discussing a chapter entitled "The Lord is a Man of War" from Sacred Scripture, Sacred War, the Bible, and the American Revolution by James Byrd. Napoleon Bonaparte once said that I'd rather have a lucky general than a good one. This might be perplexing to some military historians. However, we can infer that Napoleon is talking about providence. He's talking about a general that's destined to be great versus one that's simply skilled. So then how does God and the Christian worldview fit into this view of war and revolution and resistance? This is something that Jefferson, Adams, and Franklin will all write about during the American Revolutionary War. And in fact, John Adams wrote a letter to Abigail making a parallel connection between the case of Israel and America and the conduct of the Pharaoh and that of King George III of Great Britain. It's the story of Exodus. The story of Exodus is synonymous with liberty. And they state on page 51 that the Lord is a man of war in Exodus 15:3. This is also very similar to a sermon that was given by Stephen Case called Defensive Arms Vindicated on page 716, where he states, "O crown, more noble than happy, may the Spirit of God, the grace of God, the power of God, the presence of God, arm you against all other sins, evils, snares, and temptations, as you are by a good hand of heaven, armed against worldly ambition and worldly glory." Mark David Hall also discusses the idea of resistance within a Christian worldview and did America have a Christian founding? He says, "These ideas were developed and significantly expanded by the Protestant reformers. John Calvin, the most politically conservative of these men, contended that in some cases, inferior magistrates might resist an ungodly ruler." And this is important to understand that even though that some priests, some ministers might have pushed aside the idea of resistance by using certain passages from the Bible, whether that be in Romans or somewhere else. But if God is a man of war, then so must be the people. They must be war-ready patriots, as James Byrd says on page 55. However, the interesting part of this chapter is that he then goes on to explain how the Americans, they are the Israelites, but they're becoming like the pharaohs, like the Egyptians, to free people and enslaved people. And in fact, John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement, ridiculed American patriots. And he said, "Look into America, and you may easily see the Negro fainting under the load, bleeding under the lash." And he says this on page 56. So how do these enslaved people and free people make out the American Revolution? Well, some actually still compared America to the Israelites, but they also made note of the plight of the enslaved people. And later on, they would use the Exodus story to go on to describe their own plight during whether that's the American Civil War or sometime in the 19th century. And men like Frederick Douglass would become their Moses, would lead them to freedom. So then, who is Moses in the American Revolution? Who is he? Well, some look to Benjamin Franklin, but Benjamin Franklin was much more popular internationally. So ultimately, it has to be Washington. And so it is actually on page 67, James Byrd talks about the significance of Washington's role as Moses during the American Revolution. He says, "Upon Washington's death, Washington's death, some eulogists saw nearly perfect parallels between the two men. Just as God qualified and raised up Moses to lead the Israelites through the stormy period of their national birth, God also raised up Washington. Providence. So ultimately, these sermons, the Christian worldview during the American Revolution, they knew and understood that God was a man of war through the story of Exodus, because Exodus, as James Byrd states, is synonymous with liberty. And that is exactly how the American people saw King George III and the government there in Great Britain. Thank you for taking the time to watch this. I look forward to watching yours. Bye.